The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the pediatric ward of Grandview Medical Center as Dr. Helena Winters made her 3 a.m. rounds. What she discovered in room 312 made her blood boil. This is absolutely unacceptable. Dr. Winters' voice cut through the hospital's nighttime quiet. A nurse sitting on the floor like some kind of vagrant. Maria Santos looked up calmly from where she sat cross-legged on the polished linoleum, her back against the wall. In her lap, 4-year-old Emma Chin rested peacefully for the first time in over a week. The little girl suffered from severe anxiety disorder following a traumatic car accident that had left her parents in critical condition. Call security immediately, Dr. Winters continued, her designer heels clicking against the floor. This is a premier medical facility, not a homeless shelter. Maria didn't flinch. At 28, she had seen enough hardship to develop an unshakable composure. After losing her own parents to COVID-19, she'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school while raising her 2 younger brothers. Her specialization in pediatric trauma psychology had landed her this position at the city's most prestigious private hospital, where wealthy families paid premium rates for supposedly superior care. Emma hasn't slept in 7 days, Maria said quietly, gently stroking the child's hair. Children with severe trauma need consistent human contact to feel secure. The sedatives weren't working because she was too afraid to let her guard down. Dr. Winters adjusted her expensive white coat with disdain. Don't lecture me about medical protocol. Parents pay $15,000 a week for private rooms and professional treatment, not this circus act. Through the hallway window, a silver Mercedes pulled into the hospital's executive parking area. Robert Chin, CEO of Chin Technology Corporation and Emma's father, had recovered enough from his own injuries to visit his daughter. He moved slowly on crutches, still bearing the physical scars of the accident that had changed their family forever. What Robert didn't know was that Maria had been quietly documenting serious violations throughout the hospital's pediatric wing. Overworked staff regularly sedated children unnecessarily to keep them quiet. The hospital charged families thousands for specialized trauma therapy that consisted of nothing more than leaving children alone with tablets and cartoon videos. Most disturbing of all, Dr. Winters had been systematically billing insurance companies for psychiatric consultations that never occurred. Pack your belongings, Dr. Winters declared coldly. You're terminated for gross misconduct and violation of hospital protocols. Maria smiled, not with defeat, but with quiet confidence. Of course, Dr. Winters. But I need to wait for Emma's father to arrive. Patient safety protocols, as I'm sure you understand. What Dr. Winters didn't realize was that Maria had spent months carefully gathering evidence. Late-night photographs of falsified patient charts, audio recordings of staff discussing sedation shortcuts, and copies of billing records that showed systematic fraud totaling nearly $300,000 in fake charges over the past year. When Robert Chin pushed open the door to room 312, leaning heavily on his crutches, he stopped in amazement. His daughter, who had been screaming in terror every time anyone approached her for over a week, was sleeping peacefully in the arms of a nurse he'd never seen before. Mr. Chen! Dr. Winters practically shouted, her face flushing red. What terrible timing. I've just discovered this employee engaging in completely inappropriate behavior. She'll be removed from the premises immediately. Maria stood carefully, cradling Emma as if she were made of spun glass. When their eyes met, Robert saw not submission or fear, but a quiet dignity that gave him pause. Daddy? Emma had awakened and was reaching toward her father with small, trembling hands. But when Robert moved closer to take her, the little girl began crying and pressed herself closer to Maria. This is completely unacceptable, Dr. Winters continued, her shrill voice echoing off the hospital walls. Mr. Chen, this woman was sitting on the floor like some kind of a vagrant. What kind of image does this present to our other families? Robert watched in confusion. Emma had rejected every medical professional who had tried to help her, including the 3 child psychologists he'd hired at Dr. Winters' recommendation. Yet here she was, calm and trusting in the arms of this nurse. Maria finally spoke, her steady voice cutting through Dr. Winters' tirade. Mr. Chen, Emma is experiencing severe trauma-induced hypervigilance. She needs consistent physical contact and emotional validation to begin healing. The other approaches, she paused diplomatically, have focused more on medication management. We use evidence-based psychiatric protocols, Dr. Winters corrected sharply. This is not a daycare center, Mr. Chen. We maintain the highest professional standards. Robert noticed something intriguing in Maria's expression. She didn't seem desperate or panicked like someone who had just lost their job should. There was something in her eyes, a quiet certainty that made him curious. 6 months earlier, Maria had taken this position out of desperate financial need. Her parents' medical bills had left her family drowning in debt, and Grandview Medical Center offered nearly double the salary of public hospitals. But from her first week, she'd realized something was fundamentally wrong. Children were routinely overmedicated to keep them manageable. Insurance companies were billed for extensive therapy sessions that never happened. The hospital's premier pediatric trauma program was largely a marketing fiction designed to extract maximum revenue from desperate families. Mr. Chen, Dr. Winters said, straightening her coat authoritatively, I assure you will find a much more qualified replacement. Someone who understands our institutional standards. Maria continued gently rocking Emma, who had stopped crying completely. I'm sure you'll make whatever decision is best for Emma's recovery, she replied, but something in her tone made Dr. Winters' eyes narrow. Robert looked from Dr. Winters to Maria to his daughter, who was clearly more at peace than she'd been in weeks. In 20 years of building a technology empire, he'd learned to trust his instincts about people. And every instinct was telling him there was much more to this situation than appeared on the surface. Dr. Winters, he said slowly, I'd like to speak with both of you privately before any final decisions are made. What Dr. Winters couldn't have known was that during her months of documenting irregularities, Maria had uncovered something far more serious than negligent care. She had discovered evidence of systematic insurance fraud, falsified medical records, and embezzlement of funds designated for children's psychiatric treatment programs. Most importantly, she knew exactly who was orchestrating it all, and she had stored comprehensive evidence in multiple secure locations. While Dr. Winters pontificated about professional standards, Maria smiled quietly because she knew every discriminatory remark, every fraudulent billing entry, and every moment of child neglect had been meticulously documented, and now, with the hospital's most prominent patient's father present as a witness, the perfect moment to expose the truth was finally at hand. 3 hours later, in the hospital's administrative conference room, Dr. Winters had assembled an impressive array of allies. The hospital board chairman, 2 influential donors, and the head of legal affairs all sat around the polished mahogany table, ready to support her version of events. We must act decisively, Dr. Winters declared, adjusting her reading glasses with authority. This employee clearly lacks understanding of our institutional standards. Sitting on floors, behaving like a common babysitter. It's unacceptable. Board chairman Harold Morrison, whose wife sat on the hospital's major donor committee, frowned slightly. Helena, are you certain we're not overreacting? Robert Chen contributes significantly to our capital campaigns. That's precisely why we need to protect him, Dr. Winters replied firmly. Imagine the scandal if the media discovered that our pediatric ward employs people like that. Our reputation would be destroyed. Meanwhile, across town, Maria sat in a small coffee shop with her younger brother Diego, a 24-year-old investigative journalism student. Spread across their corner table were dozens of documents organized into precise categories. Maria, this is explosive, Diego said, flipping through the evidence his sister had compiled. Fake therapy sessions, ghost employees on the payroll, embezzled treatment funds. Dr. Winters has been stealing nearly $250,000 annually. Maria nodded calmly. And there's more. She has a scheme where she charges families extra for intensive psychiatric intervention that's supposedly required for severely traumatized children. She emotionally manipulates parents, telling them their children will never recover without these expensive additional treatments. Diego pointed to a specific spreadsheet on his laptop screen. Look at this billing record. She charged the Chen family $4,500 last month for specialized trauma desensitization therapy for Emma. But according to your notes, the child was left alone in her room for 6 hours straight that day. Exactly, Maria confirmed, her hands steady despite her contained anger. And when I started providing actual therapeutic care, she became furious because she knew I was discovering what was really happening to these children. Over the past 6 months, Maria had used her background in healthcare technology to discreetly access the hospital's internal systems. Every fraudulent charge, every falsified record, every instance of child neglect had been documented with scientific precision. She had photographed billing documents during her night shifts, recorded damaging conversations on her phone, and even gained access to Dr. Winters' private email correspondence with administrators. Diego closed the last file folder. You have enough evidence to destroy not only Dr. Winters, but the entire administrative structure that's been covering this up. The question is, what's your next move? Maria smiled, the same enigmatic expression she'd worn during the previous night's confrontation. Remember what Papa used to tell us? Patience is the sharpest sword of the wise. Yes, but Maria, Diego protested. Dr. Winters has no idea who she's dealing with. She thinks you're just another desperate nurse who needs the job. She doesn't know you graduated summa cum laude in pediatric psychology, that you speak 4 languages fluently, or that you spent 3 years working as a healthcare policy consultant before taking this position. The following morning, Dr. Winters called Maria into the administrative boardroom for a formal termination hearing. The room was crowded with hospital leadership, influential board members, and even the hospital's chief legal counsel. Everyone stared at Maria with a mixture of pity and contempt as she entered, carrying only a simple leather portfolio. Maria, Dr. Winters began with false sympathy. After careful deliberation, we've concluded that your approach to patient care doesn't align with our institutional mission. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Maria nodded thoughtfully. I understand completely, Dr. Winters. It's remarkable how intelligent people can sometimes make such impulsive decisions. Dr. Winters frowned at Maria's calm, almost amused tone. Impulsive? I don't understand what you mean. Oh, it's just that I received a very intriguing phone call last night, Maria said, slowly opening her portfolio. From the State Healthcare Fraud Investigation Unit. Apparently, someone filed an anonymous complaint about financial irregularities and patient care violations at this hospital. Dr. Winters' face went ashen. That's completely ridiculous. Who would make such an accusation? Maria smiled again, removing an official government letter from her folder. Well, as you'll discover in approximately, she glanced at her watch, 12 minutes when the federal investigators arrive, they have extremely detailed evidence. Documents, recordings, photographs. 6 months of systematic investigation, actually. Meanwhile, Robert Chen was in his corporate office when his personal attorney called with urgent news. Robert, there's a major federal investigation happening at the hospital right now. Healthcare fraud, patient neglect, systematic overbilling. And the nurse who was fired last night. She's apparently the whistleblower who provided all the evidence. And Robert, his lawyer continued, she's not just any nurse. Exceptional credentials, multiple specializations, policy consulting background. She's been documenting everything for months. At that moment, Robert realized he had witnessed something far more significant than a simple wrongful termination. He had seen the beginning of the downfall of a corrupt system that had been profiting from his daughter's suffering. Back in the boardroom, chaos was erupting as Maria continued her methodical presentation. Dr. Winters, you mentioned institutional standards. Let me show you what those standards actually look like. She spread documents across the conference table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Over 6 months, I documented that this hospital charges an average of $3,200 extra per week from families with traumatized children. Money for treatments that were never provided. She pointed to specific billing records. The Chen family's account shows charges of $4,500 monthly for specialized trauma therapy. In reality, Emma was left alone for hours while staff falsified treatment notes. Board Chairman Morrison had gone completely silent, realizing he had been complicit in fraud for years. Dr. Winters, please tell me this isn't accurate. Dr. Winters tried desperately to maintain control. You can't trust this woman's word. She's clearly a disgruntled employee who holds a master's degree in pediatric psychology, summa cum laude from Johns Hopkins, Robert Chin interrupted, entering the room with 2 federal agents. Who worked as a healthcare policy consultant for the State Department of Health before taking this position. Agent Patricia Williams showed her credentials to the room. Dr. Winters, we have a warrant to search these premises. We also have some questions about financial discrepancies reported at this facility. Dr. Winters attempted to project authority, but her voice was shaking. This must be some kind of mistake. Our hospital has maintained an exemplary reputation for over 20 years. 20 years of systematic healthcare fraud, actually, Maria corrected calmly, continuing to organize her evidence. Agent Williams, I believe you'll find that Grandview Medical Center has been billing insurance companies for psychiatric services that were never rendered, maintaining ghost employees on the payroll, and embezzling funds designated for pediatric trauma programs. She turned to another page of documentation. Dr. Winters personally approved charges averaging $180,000 annually for non-existent treatments. Agent Williams consulted her notes. Ms. Santos, these recordings you provided, they're admissible because they were made during official staff meetings? According to hospital policy, Section 7.3, Maria confirmed. All clinical discussions may be recorded for quality assurance purposes. Maria continued relentlessly, flipping to another section of evidence. I also have complete documentation of the ghost employee scheme. 7 staff members receiving full salaries and benefits who never provided patient care. Dr. Winters made one final desperate attempt. You can't trust anything this woman says. She's nothing but a vindictive employee who has a master's degree in pediatric psychology from one of the nation's top programs, Robert interjected, consulting his phone. Who worked as a healthcare policy consultant and published research on trauma-informed care for children. The room fell silent as the weight of the evidence became undeniable. Dr. Winters realized that her discrimination and fraud had finally caught up with her. Maria gathered her documents and moved toward the door. You know what, Dr. Winters? When I sat on that floor with Emma last night, my only concern was helping a frightened child finally feel safe enough to rest. I never imagined that moment would become the catalyst for exposing years of systematic abuse against vulnerable children and their families. She paused at the doorway for one final comment. You were right about one thing, though. I didn't truly understand the standards of this institution. Because I believed healthcare should be about healing children, not profiting from their suffering. 2 years later, the headline in the National Healthcare Journal read, Former hospital whistleblower establishes revolutionary pediatric trauma center, receives $75 million in funding. Maria Santos sat in her bright corner office in downtown Chicago, surrounded by awards for pediatric care innovation, certifications in trauma-informed therapy, and a framed photograph of Emma Chin taking her first confident steps into a classroom after months of proper treatment. Robert Chin entered carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a genuine smile. The quarterly numbers just came in. We've successfully treated over 600 children in our first 18 months. The insurance reimbursement model is working perfectly. Maria smiled back, reviewing the latest patient outcomes data. And the restitution fund? All affected families have received full compensation. The recovery fund we established has distributed $6.2 million so far. Children who were neglected at Grandview now have access to premier trauma therapy at no cost to their families. For months after Dr. Winters' arrest, Maria had received calls from hundreds of families across the country. Not just from Grandview, but from similar hospitals everywhere, stories of fraudulent billing, systematic neglect, untrained staff, and administrators who prioritized profit margins over patient care. Robert had approached her with a proposal: create a new model for pediatric trauma care, with transparent billing, evidence-based treatment, and families as true partners in the healing process. Maria had accepted, but only as a business partner, not as a charity recipient. I want to build something sustainable, she had explained. Something that doesn't require billionaire philanthropy to survive. Within 18 months, the center was treating more than 600 children directly and had trained 315 specialized trauma therapists. The Santos-Chin protocol for pediatric trauma recovery had been officially adopted by healthcare systems in 5 states. There's something else, Robert said, his expression becoming more serious. Emma asked me to give you this. He handed Maria a drawing, a crayon sketch of 2 figures holding hands, with "Thank you for helping me feel safe" written in careful 6-year-old handwriting. Maria felt tears forming in her eyes. Over the past 2 years, Emma had transformed from a terrified, traumatized child into a confident kindergartner who loved school and made friends easily. She's remarkable. How is she adjusting? She starts 1st grade next month, Robert replied proudly. Her teachers say she's one of the most empathetic children they've ever met. She wants to be a helper nurse like you when she grows up. The following week, the congressional hearing room was packed with cameras and reporters as Maria, wearing a professional Navy suit, testified before the House Subcommittee on Healthcare Fraud with the same methodical calm she had displayed when exposing Dr. Winters. Ms. Santos, said Congresswoman Jennifer Martinez, in your professional opinion, what systemic changes are needed to prevent this type of healthcare fraud? Maria leaned into the microphone. Congresswoman, we need mandatory transparency in pediatric billing, surprise quality audits, and most importantly, we need to listen to families. Parents know when their children aren't receiving proper care. The testimony was broadcast nationally. Within hours, Maria's center received over 500 calls from parents, medical professionals, and investors wanting to support their expansion. Diego, now a published journalist and the center's communications director, entered Maria's office with a stack of news articles. Maria, you've become a national authority on pediatric trauma care. Stanford Medical School wants you to develop their new curriculum. Maria smiled, but her attention was drawn to the treatment room window, where Emma was laughing and playing with other young patients during group therapy. You know what's most important, Diego? Emma just told her therapist that she wants to help other scared kids feel brave. She learned that from watching you, Robert said, joining the conversation. 3 pediatric specialists said she would need years of intensive treatment to function normally. She just needed someone who understood that healing requires both professional expertise and genuine human compassion. Special children aren't broken, Maria replied, watching Emma help a newer patient feel comfortable during playtime. They just need caregivers who understand that healing happens through connection, not just through medication. A year after Dr. Winters' conviction, Maria received an unexpected letter. It was written from federal prison, where the former doctor was serving a 5-year sentence for healthcare fraud. The letter was brief, not exactly an apology, but an acknowledgement that her greed had damaged innocent children and their families. During a recent interview on national television, the host asked, Maria, did you plan this entire investigation from the beginning? It wasn't about planning revenge, she replied thoughtfully. It was about documentation and accountability. When you witness systematic harm being done to vulnerable children, you have 2 choices: accept it as inevitable, or gather evidence methodically until you can change it. I chose to change it. And what advice would you give to healthcare workers facing similar ethical dilemmas? Maria considered her words carefully. Trust your professional instincts. Document everything. And remember that your first obligation is always to the patients in your care, especially when they can't advocate for themselves. Today, the Maria Santos Center for Pediatric Trauma Recovery has treated over 1,500 children and trained more than 3,000 healthcare professionals in trauma-informed care. Dr. Helena Winters remains in federal prison, working in the medical library and reportedly struggling with the recognition that her greed destroyed both her career and her freedom. The Santos protocol has revolutionized pediatric trauma treatment and literally saved thousands of children from inadequate care. And it all began because one nurse decided that sitting on a hospital floor to comfort a frightened child was more important than maintaining appearances for administrators who valued profit over healing.